have a collection of friends on the line who are invited to ask questions.
Very good.
In the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a Q&A button. If anyone would like to ask a question, because this is very much a session, we will answer any questions, including, is it true that Jean-Marc is actually broadcasting from Alaska or not? Any questions are on the table. Please do ask questions. We've got a question already from Beren Soa, which I'll respond to in a minute. But first, we're just going to have a short conversation to get things going while people continue to join us, and then we'll dive into it, so on. So my guest today on this Green Bonds Clinic, which is a regular webinar that the Climate Bonds Initiative is hosting for anyone who wants to ask any questions, including about Alaska, but primarily about green bonds. And each of these events will have a guest, one of the good friends that we work with in the market to grow the green bonds market. So Jean-Marc is a legendary banker, I'm going to say. He's a vice chairman of capital markets for HSBC Global Banking and Markets. He has a global remit. He will look at a bond, not just a green bond, anywhere in the world. And his team are doing bond issuance everywhere around the world. Of course, in some markets, they have a particularly strong presence, notably Europe and China and Hong Kong and East Asia and ASEAN and Japan, and I'll go on and go on and go on. But
Middle East and the Middle East.
And of course, the Middle East, where we've seen some interesting things coming out recently, haven't we?
That's right.
Aqua with its green sukuk, and of course the was the National Bank of Abu Dhabi with its green bond.
Yeah, FAB. Yeah. And First Abu Dhabi Bank. Yeah. I've done two.
Sorry, the name's changed, of course, since the merger. I keep forgetting. So I'm hoping we're going to see a lot. And of course, the UAE regulators have brought out their green finance principles as well to guide work, to try and coordinate function amongst all the regulators in growing this market. So, let's start there. Is there any gossip? Have you got anything you can tell us about something that's happened?
Yeah, let's start with the Middle East. I mean, I love the region. I go there quite a bit. Well, not recently, it's difficult, but to give you a sense, a few years ago, I was at a conference, one of the largest Middle East conference. And after like a panel, at the end of the panel, I realized, hold on a second, we have not spoken about green at all during the whole panel. I was a panelist, I was not a moderator. And so I went, hey, actually, green and environmental friendly, social bonds, we can do these things in the Middle East as well. We shouldn't be shy. A year later, there was a panel on green. And now you've seen, NBAD and now FAB do 2 trades. We've done 2 trades for MAF, the real estate and retail group. Right. Egypt is building a framework. You've seen, a lot going on.
In fact, there's even story of a sovereign out of Egypt, if I understand. They're considering doing a green sovereign.
Egypt as a sovereign, that's right. They are building their framework now. They went public about this. We are working on it. So it's a lot going on with a lot of questions from financials, corporates, and sovereigns across the region. So it's really happening. It's great.
So what's the other market that excites you? Or take us around the world, Jean-Marc, about what you're seeing.
I'll take you, I'll look at the question slightly differently. I'll take you through history for a second. History doesn't go very far. We all think of 2007 when the EIB and World Bank did the first trade, but even just since 2014, 2015, since Paris, basically, we've seen a few key trades, I would call it. Obviously, we can talk about the very recent, like last week trades. I mean, we can talk later about Henkel, which did the first plastic reduction bonds. We love that one. Obviously, we did it, so that's why we love it. But it's true, it's new. Plastic reduction, I have a particular interest in plastic. I think it's a lot of work to do here. But if you go back, we think of France, and we discuss very often that, they were a game changer because of the size. France showed that you can do big in green. You can go back to what Fannie Mae has done, again, establishing that, American names can do it. They can do it in size. Again, you think of Apple, did big, large trades. And I think, if you go back to, again, it's only just a few years, go back where we were at the inception of the green bond principle. It's just a few years ago, go back to Paris, the COP21, when really the private sector came in. And it came at the right time. You had all the multilateral development bank, all the MDB saying, well, we actually want to leverage the private sector. We started working together, not just on, SDGs and developments, but also on green. And for me, 5 years ago, that's really where it changed. We started to really work together, and even 5 years later, we are still just starting. We had but again, maybe we talk about it later on, but we did some private initiative around asset management with the IFC, and now with others. We talk about
that's a good thing.
later.
This is this Regio
back
fund, right?
to the key, the Regio, yeah. But just to stay with the trades, it's in debt capital markets, it's not about concept, it's about deals. So if you do like the first transaction from a telecom company, and when Telefonica did it last year, it's a milestone. You actually change, you finance the move from copper to fiber optics, and it's a huge change in the consumption of electricity. And you can, you can discuss, always some people will discuss, okay, well, we'd have done it anyway without green, you have to do it, but well, no,
but there's a need to recognize.
There is no recognize that, they did it, they invested to change, and I think it's 70% cut in consumption of electricity. So it's a major change. And it was the first telecom company to do that. I think it was a fantastic trade. If I remember well, we had a 1.8 billion book for that transaction. So clearly a huge interest from the investor side, a very, very large euro trade. So, it's good to do new ones. So every time you do something new, like, the French OAT back it's now 3.5 years ago. So I think it's all about those transactions.
Well, we had Esteban Garrido from Telefonica on a webinar a few weeks ago, looking at ICT and the EU taxonomy, and it is a great story. And we've seen other issues too. I mean, the Swisscom deal was very interesting too, that came out a bit over a month ago, 14 times oversubscribed for €500 million, if I remember correctly. So the demand's there, as it was the Telefonica as well. Do you see demand holding up through the crisis? What's your reading for thematic issuance?
Yeah, I think we still have this problematic, not a balance between supply and demand. We don't have enough supply. And it's good news, right? The demand is there. There is a lot of appetite for investors to green their portfolio voluntarily because their clients want it, or maybe it's coming as well in terms of regulatory environment, but everybody wants to green their portfolio for whatever reason. And on the other side, supply, well, that demand is actually pushing companies, pushing financial institutions like ourselves, pushing the MDBs, pushing sovereigns to go that route too. So finance is actually useful. So we have seen huge supply, but it's still 3, 4, 5% of the bond market. So it's actually very tiny. So that demand is still getting all those transactions oversubscribed, which is great news. And we are looking for more. We're looking for new ideas, for new trades, for large trades. And I guess, in terms of currency, where we're doing dollars and euros, and it's a lot in euros. Europe has been kind of leading. You have a lot in RMB as well. China has done very well. There's a very clear objective to green their economy. But euro is leading. And that continues to be a market that wants more supply. Some of those companies, they come back. Philips they did 2 trades. Iberdrola did several transactions. We are in the market now with a company.
Iberdrola issued in the midst of the crisis 6 or 7 weeks ago, and they were 11 times oversubscribed right in the heart of the COVID crisis, right?
That's right. So they've done very well, and it's about healthcare, and they did very well with that. So the appetite, the interest, I don't really like the appetite, the interest of investors for green and for social, right? We've seen the COVID bonds, is obvious. it's obvious, it's still there, it's growing. You have more and more funds being created, more and more clients moving to that, which is great. You know, we want to do more.
The market, the green bond market has given rise to these children, the sustainability market, the social bond market, and now the pandemic and COVID bond market. It's been fascinating, all using the same idea, which is a use of proceeds idea. And I think we've seen 700 COVID bonds so far this year. It's amazing.
Yeah, we've done more than $50 billion of COVID-19 sort of theme bonds. And you're right, somehow there was a bit less green bond issuance, but a sharp increase in social. You know, UNEDIC did a very large transaction, you know, several billion of them, helping the impact, being associated the impact of the social impact and the unemployment impact of the COVID-led crisis. So yeah, I mean, COVID bond have been very, very, very present. I think 54 billion the last time I looked to give you the exact number. And actually, the ICMA and the SBP did a good job at being, you know, on top of that early on in March. There was some guidance to make sure there was no like a COVID washing, if you will. Especially some investors are looking at those, you know, are interested, but then issuers didn't have a framework in place sometimes. So they had to just commit to the usage without a framework in place, and then they can put the framework in place later on. And so I haven't heard a lot of criticism. It worked.
No, the market's been very receptive.
Supporting the market, and we want to know where the money is going. It's good.
But at the end of the day, what counts is the end of year report about where it goes, doesn't it? So if the commitment's there to do it right.
Yeah, that's right.
And the market has been very receptive to those, which I think has been a great development. I mean, clearly over time we'll develop more frameworks and rule sets and for these other markets as well, as we already have in the social and sustainable market. But it has been exciting to see the growth of thematic issuance, and because I call this capital with purpose. You want to get the yield and risk levels you need, but you can also have your money contributing to improving society in some way. It's becoming a norm. It's no longer no longer a niche.
You had in the French conference, Bruno Le Maire came to this, and actually Minister Hulot came as well. And Bruno Le Maire, the Minister of Finance at the time, said, you know, finance will be green or will not be. And I think there is huge pressure for all of us to really contribute. So I'm very happy. It's the right way.
So I've got a couple of questions here just to kick us going. So the majority of green bonds, this is Beren Soa, of green bonds are geared towards climate mitigation. What's the role of adaptation and resilience in the future bonds market? So we've seen some adaptation and resilience bonds already, haven't we?
Yeah.
What do you see?
I think it's, well, I will never criticize what clients are doing, but I think it's a bit niche in a way, and it's a bit difficult. So, you know, I think green is very clear. You know, at the end of it, you know, the whole of this, we need a relatively large market, very clear market, so that investors can invest large sum, issuers can raise large sum. So yes, you can do like, you know, smaller trades, niche trades, like we've just done this plastic reductions, kind of to lead the way, to open the door, to open new markets. But overall, you need really large size. You know, when Ireland did their green bonds, and they were saying, look, you know, we just finished rebuilding the country from the crisis. Now we want to build a country for the future. I was with them on the roadshow, and they raised 3 billion euros. And they were saying, look, you know, any investments now, we want to be green. You know, we want to build or invest in our future, build our infrastructure in a green manner. So that's why we do this transaction and actually raise. So you need to be able to raise 3 billion. So you need, you know, very broad-based targets, objectives, and the framework has to be quite clear and relatively simple. So you can then, you know, check it.
I'm a little bit more bullish than that around adaptation resilience. I mean, we've seen some the major bonds. The Netherlands sovereign was largely an adaptation bond. So it was certified climate bond, in fact, for coastal protection measures. And I think
Wow.
they're now at about 10 billion. In fact, when they opened, they did a tap of the bond a couple of weeks ago, and Elvira Erlings, the treasurer, said to me that in 4 minutes, they got 1.4 billion of orders.
They've been super successful.
That was super successful.
True.
But that's an adaptation bond to a large degree. Cape Town has done a water bond, Cape Town Municipality, San Francisco Public Utilities Corporations have done adaptation bonds for their water infrastructure. So the key thing is not whether the asset looks unlike what you're thinking it is, such as renewable energy. The concern more is whether the market accepts it as a green bond, thanks to guidance to the market.
Yep.
This is where things like our own climate bonds taxonomy or the European taxonomy will be very important, because they're broadening people's horizons of what need to be included. So when we talk about resilience bonds, we're saying this is not a separate market. It has to be part of the same large liquid market, which are investments going to address our biggest environmental challenges, specifically, and most importantly, climate change. That's essentially it. And the more we can understand that, it's not just renewable, it's not just green building, it's not just electric vehicles, it's also steel plants. Steel plants that are shifting towards where they have to get to achieve our emissions targets. Some people are calling these transition bonds. And I think there's probably an argument, Jean-Marc, for a sub-label, which is transitions, for those brown companies that have otherwise been excluded, but are still doing good things. What do you think? Do you see appetite for this?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Sean. I really think transition is an additional part of the market, if you will. It's fine if you are doing renewables as a company. It's relatively easy. If you need to structure, you need to report, you need to have a eligible project. That's fine. But if you are, a bit more brown as your business, but you really want to transition your company into greener processes, better buildings, better water management, less electricity. There's lots of usage. Transition is what you need. So I think it was interesting to see at the latest AGM, actually transition really at the forefront of the ICMA Sustainable Bond Principles AGM. That's my little hat of ICMA board here. But that's super important, because you need, in a way, to be inclusive, right? So all those companies who feel that there is no room for them in green bonds, well, actually there is room for them. It's called transition. And the word is ambitious. Are you ambitious about transforming your company? I remember many years ago now, several years ago, the Repsol transaction, which was a big discussion, a big debate. And, we were a book runner.
And we were a critic.
And you were a critic. We were not in your index, which is fair. But it was, super good to have this debate. Because
I agree.
that led to the transition concept, in a way. If you accept that some of the most brownest companies, if you will, because they are like oil companies, actually these guys also want to go and do better. So what is the path, right? So if you're ambitious into changing your companies, transition bonds, I think is a very good element. And we actually sit on the committee for transition bonds, because we are really passionate about that.
Repsol did a good job of disclosure and transparency that allowed us to actually have a look at it. I mean, at climate bonds, our concern was that the use of proceeds was not necessarily ambitious enough for it to be done. But we applauded the work they'd done and explaining what they were doing and meeting the principles of the market. Of course, Repsol have since had a slight change of corporate strategy. Now they're investing in renewables. So if they were to come to market with a renewable energy bond issued by an oil company, we would cheer from the rooftops, I can tell you. But I guess this is the discussion about transitions, which is underway now, and what they need to look like. We'll see how it evolves. For those people who are listening, we have a Green Transitions Climate Bonds Conference on 8th, 9th, 10th September, where we'll be exploring in some detail these questions of how we transition our economies and develop bonds and other investments in these markets. But let me go to another question here. We've got a question here about issuance, Jean-Marc. As you know, we've had a relatively small amount of green bond issuance compared to last year, 90 billion US so far. social bond, of course, has been more than 90 billion, social and pandemic and COVID. So it's larger than that. So there's a bit of a displacement going on. We forecast last December that we might see 350 billion of issuance this year. What do you think our chances are? I'm hearing that there are two things happening, that a lot of the corporate issuers for the first half of the year delayed all their plans to see how things are going, but have still got their frameworks ready and are still considering issuing the second half of the year, especially because rates are extraordinarily low, of course. But on top of that, we hear a lot more talk of sovereigns coming to market in the second half of the year, such as Germany announcing coming to market in September. I think with a 10 billion euro program. What's your prognosis for the green theme this year, separate to the social and sustainability theme? Any thoughts? Will we see a massive uptake?
Yeah. I don't have a number, but for sure, there was a lot of potential trades, if you will, at the start of the year. People are certainly looking at it. We had many clients, like new programs, new frameworks, new clients coming to it, and I think they didn't want to do a trade at the wide end of the spreads. Yeah. So they just continued to work on the program, discussing, in the secondary party opinion guys. They were just, like working on the program. So I think second half, if the market is in a better shape, which obviously currently it is, we should see new names like Germany you mentioned. Hopefully we see people like Egypt and others. I'm confident we'll have new names coming to the market. I obviously can't disclose people who have not published that they have a framework going, but what we saw the last 2 years, I thought was an extraordinary expansion in terms of geography, right? Mm-hmm. So Chile did a trade, and obviously in Europe, many countries
very successful trades.
In the Middle East, we saw one or two talk about it, open the framework discussion. In Asia, Hong Kong, Korea, sustainability. So you can see, obviously, China with the policy banks have been super busy. So you can see it's happening. You can see, but it takes time. It's like a lot of work, but I'm super confident we'll have more and more countries going through that path.
And Japan also has now started growing as a green bond market. We've seen 100% growth last year. And
it's a good point. It's a good point. It's fascinating because from the investor side, these guys are all over that. We just did this Henkel plastic reduction bonds, plus partnerships with Daiichi Life as a buyer. It's public info. It has been some heavy work to make it proper, which we're very proud of. And we've seen a lot of themes bonds. We've seen the support of Japanese investors for the last 5 years for green bonds, for social bonds. So I'm surprised I haven't seen more issuers from Japan actually go that route. It's very surprising where their investor base is so present on this matter. Despite discussing, we haven't seen yet so much coming from Japan, but I'm sure it's coming. And the policy banks are going there obviously, but not beyond the policy banks.
We're also the sovereign issuance has been the theme of our times, and of course France kicked off the discussion about sovereigns with announcing they would do it. Although I do remember that I think you pit them at the post with your support for the Polish sovereign bond that came out just before the French sovereign bond at the time. So in fact, the first issuer globally was Poland in the sovereign space. And now we have
the first from the first from a country, and saying, but the first from G7 with a huge size was France. So absolutely, I think Poland was interesting because we demonstrated the country can do it, but France showed the size you can achieve. So that was a game changer from that.
I think they're over 25 billion now with the last tap a couple of weeks ago, right? 25 billion euros.
Exactly.
Which is massive.
That's right. And France has, you have France as a DOAT, but you have UNEDIC, which is like, a state office, right, effectively for unemployment. So you have many others, you have AFD doing stuff, you have a lot of other entities, if you will, of the French state that are super busy in the space. So the country is clearly leading. Right? Just to come back to your earlier question, I think we are made, the path is paved with the transactions. So it's one by one you build, we did Mexico City Airport, which unfortunately was then bought back for change of strategy by the new government. But at the time, there was a lot of debate again. What? An airport doing green? What are you talking about? Well, yeah, but if your buildings are zero emissions, you reclaim land around the airport, natural biodiversity,
and there was a railway line natural,
in it. So I mean, there was a lot of things that was like a blueprint for any kind of airport being built in the future. So it's totally transformational, and it ties to this transition. But okay, the planes may not yet be green, but if everything else is green, that's a big step forward. And again, we should be very proud with that. You can lead the way, and well, the next export. What if JFK or what if others? What are other airports doing? So you can see every little trades will help, and help the future as an example.
Now, what's your standard line on the very frequent question of benefits and pricing in the markets?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I've got a line too, but I'm curious to see what you're comfortable saying.
No, I think price is one thing. Let's talk about that afterwards. But you just don't do it for the 1 basis points. I think you do it for the benefits. Well, the first benefits, which we don't see very often discussed, is the motivation of the staff. Right? So when ministries work on this, instead of being another one project, it's super exciting for them. It's in a way, you have different ministries working together, working with the parliament to get a law going, working together to get everybody aligned, everything aligned. It's actually very positive. And you talk to banks, they have to create management information. You talk to corporates, you have to align from down to the project level. Everyone says across all these things, you change, if you will, the ethos. People are motivated with what they do. And I think it's super important. So that's not very often because it's not financial, but actually people are proud to come to the office and do that work to in the end, produce a green bond. And after that, report and proudly report they are using the money the right way. So I think that's a very important benefit that is, again, not financial in a way. Obviously, investor diversification. People who are buying green maybe were not buying you before. When EDF did their renewable trade, which again was one of the milestone transactions, and very much discussed at the time. But yeah, okay, a nuclear company, you can think what you want, but they did a renewable trade, and there was an interest for, okay, I cannot buy EDF, but when they start moving to renewables, I invest and support them for that. So again, so diversity of investors is super important. And I think we go back also to what it should be, what bond raising, bonds transaction should be. Basically, because of this use of proceeds, you talk to investors. You go there and you explain what you will do with the money. I'm going to invest in this, in that. This is a project. This is why. And you're back to basics. You basically do a roadshow. You basically go and meet investors, convince them to lend you the money for this, not just for general corporate purpose. Well, okay. So here it's back to what it should be in a way, right? So these are, for me, the 3 things. I'm sure you have many others. And then the price. Yeah, the price has to be reasonable. And I think at the moment we are in the right camp. It's slightly inside. So there is value, if you will, for a corporate or a financial institutions to come and do the work and do green and move to green or move to social, because you get a small benefit. If it's too expensive compared to your curve, I think maybe investors will not follow. But we are in the right place where we are inside. I think the execution dynamics, if you will, on the day of the trade are better. So sometimes you have a tough market. You just hinted that a few days ago, the Phillips trade. The market can be tough, but people want to put their hands on it. So they will buy, even if markets are a bit shaky that day or that week. So you get a benefit from having a stronger book, a diverse book, but also price-wise, probably the new issue premium or even the final price might be slightly inside your brown curve or your conventional curve, if you will. So I think these are, for me, the 3 or 4 advantages, but I'm sure you have many, many more.
No, look, I think that's right. When we surveyed issuers early this year, we spoke to 86 issuers around the world. Some of them were getting price, sometimes 5 basis points or 15 basis points in their thinking. Doesn't show up in the data we see a lot of the time, but I'm willing to trust the Treasurer's view on this. However, none of them were doing it for the price. They were doing it for the investor engagement. And that was their motivation. And that I thought that was fascinating to see. You do see some data about flow-on effects. In Europe, if you're a corporate and issue a green bond, you generally get a stock price bounce and it stays up. There's now statistical correlation about that, which suggests that investors are indeed using green bonds as signaling, as a tool to pick out companies that are doing the right thing, essentially reducing their risk of being affected by the transition to a low carbon economy, which everyone believes is going to happen, and no one really knows how it's going to pan out. So there are powerful benefits along those lines. We've got a couple other questions. First, private placement and size of bonds. I appreciate you're working on public bonds. HSBC does a bit of private placement. What's the cutoff are you seeing in different sorts of markets? And are you seeing any private placement activity, or is it just not on the horizon?
No. It's a very good question, John. So this Henkel trade was a private placement. They wanted to raise, $100 million, and so we worked for some time with the HE to agree on the framework and agree the motivation and the structuring, and we ended up doing $70 million. That was the first funding of this kind, plastic reduction bonds. So they were agreeing to cut, packaging of or having recyclable or reusable packaging by 2025. They were halving the amount of fossil-based plastics they use, or what we call virgin plastics, new one. Preventing plastic waste, from being disposed of in the environment. So a lot of commitments from Henkel. And the HLF was happy to have a small piece, $70 million. It's really a private placement, which is probably totally liquid. And then we placed another 25 million euros into another client on the back of, hearing about it. So this is the small sizes, right? And then you've got the very large, transactions, whether it's for Apple or actually Telefonica, or we're doing the transaction. I mean, Tenet in the Netherlands did now 6 billion of green bonds, right? So some companies have moved on to become really green issuer and regularly come to the market. You mentioned Iberdrola earlier, so they come and they come and they come again, or social like Unedik, they come and come again. So we are really, for me, we see it's very early days, right? Because we are still like 5% of the market, but you can see the switch. You can see some clients have switched and now are doing green bonds as they used to do just bonds. And that's fantastic. That's really what we want. This has to become, the key to funding.
In fact, one investor, I think it was someone from AP4 in Sweden, was telling me in Sweden, because for our listeners, Sweden has the highest per capita issuance of green bonds in the world.
That's fantastic stats.
We've got investors saying that if someone issues a bond and it's not green, one of the first questions is asked them now is there something we should know? Is there a reason you haven't done a green bond? I think that's where we're going globally, right? That's what it looks like. How about in smaller areas, in lower capital markets and emerging markets? In Africa, we've seen a few issuance. We've seen, I think, 4 bonds out of Nigeria, 2 sovereigns, 2 corporates, one in Kenya, quite a few out of South Africa, and that's beginning to get going again. This is used in terms of emerging markets. Do you see this developing? Is it purely a function of capital markets? What we in fact see in Africa, what we've been seeing in India, which is the green bonds have been driving corporate bond market growth with an appetite for that kind of thematic. What's your hunch?
So emerging market is obviously Africa, it's LATAM, right? It's Middle East and Asia, Eastern Europe. So I see a lot of interest. I see issuance. We've done a green bond for green property from Eastern Europe. So people are, again, I don't like to say it's, with signaling, as you say, it shouldn't be just a marketing for a company. It should be a true change, right? So when you're building a big real estate, but you are actually doing new buildings, the LEED and all the new norm, if you will. Yeah, you should finance that growth by doing green bonds. So it's good to see from Eastern Europe. In LATAM, we've seen several transactions. Again, in the Middle East, math, again, buildings. You have air conditioning, but actually, if you do it the right way, it's actually quite green. It's neutral. So in Asia, India has been a big growth market. You're right, but also Korea and others. Hong Kong has obviously done as a sovereign to do the signaling, like, guys, we want to go that way. That was super positive. You've seen the first COVID bonds from the Bank of China, Macau, again, trying to signal that they really needed to finance the impact and help companies and retail through the crisis. So, yeah, it's super busy in emerging markets. I think we need more sovereigns, again, to show the path, to lead. Africa, when maybe not so present in sub-Saharan Africa, so I don't have a lot of examples. We are in South Africa, there's a lot of interest as well, it's true. But I think, what we, as we see, what we thought we did not see in emerging markets is the size. Yeah? A lot of the needs are relatively small. And so it's good to aggregate those. So either you go through the development banks and you finance those, or you go through the asset management route. So they then can buy into it. So we started this Regio funds, which is the Regio called Real Economy Green Investment Opportunity Regio. We partner with IFC. So they put $100, we put $75 of seed money. It's now, we just closed $475 million in May. So it's growing above 1 billion now of investment into green for emerging markets, for the real economy, for actually corporates. And they can buy maybe a smaller size or large size. So I think emerging markets will go through smaller trades. They'll have to go through that. They'll have to go and really go very deep down, probably for the small size through the MDBs and the local development banks to be able to really come down to the $10 million, $50 million projects. Because that's very often, that's where the difference is. But look, worldwide, we talk about 30 trillion or more of investments to green and decarbon the economy, right? Infrastructure in particular, in the next 30 years. So it's a lot to be done. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
Now, we're going to hit some challenges of funding. I mean, when I chaired a panel with the debt management heads of Germany, Netherlands, France, and the UK a couple of weeks ago, and they're talking about their funding requirements this year quadrupling compared to what they were thinking. It's extraordinary, the growth that some countries are going to run out of headroom. So there's a challenge for them whether they're going to be able to continue to issue bonds, let alone green bonds and sovereign bonds. One of the questions we've had has been about off-balance sheet vehicles and whether we might see growth in that. I think China is a good example of this, where we've already seen the independent asset-backed vehicles at a provincial level and the scope for those to come to international markets with green bonds, which are backed by assets like subway companies and so on. Have you seen, is this conversation started yet? I mean, at Climate Bonds, we think this is going to be a critically important conversation for places like ASEAN and East Asia going forward. But that would require a much larger asset-backed market in those areas than we've seen so far, with maybe the odd sprinkle of a guarantee from a development bank to get it going and so on. Do you see this, or is this a pipe dream for me?
I mean, securitization and asset-backed, it's still a bit complex for some investors. So I much prefer, project bonds that are green, for example. It's simpler to understand, and it goes into more of the investors' guidelines, if you will. So there will be growth in asset-backed, I think, in terms of security of what you do, because you may have a little tranche at the bottom, but maybe one of the MDBs will buy, and that will help. I think that's one of the paths of this new initiative, fast infra. I think you're part of that. And that again, it's HSBC, but it's IFC, it's several others partnering to really move the needle into infrastructure. Next turn talk about building back better, which is now I think coming to be a campaign slogan in the US, but let's call it neutral. About the faster finance to accelerate the sustainable transition. I mean, infrastructure has I think several issues. We need to scale up. We need it to be green. So that fast infra is absolutely doing that. OECD, IFC, World Bank, the GIF, and the CPI. All together, we want to develop sustainable infrastructure and make it a deep and liquid asset class, which today, for many years, we have not managed to do that. It's still like, it's not cookie cutter at all. And it's still every time a very long roadshow, a lot of work to be able to make people understand what you're trying to do on that one project. So if we can make it green and develop a sustainable label that people understand, that will really be super useful. If we could have also a platform when investors can meet and aggregate and help sustain those infrastructure projects, I think that's super good. I mean, we have, as you know, we have 3 working groups. One of them on the label, one of them on the scalability, which has always been a problem. Forget green for a second. 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was always a problem. You do a trade, and then nobody ever do that solution again. So you pay the lawyers' fees, you organize, you have to sell it to understand it. And then next time there is a new hospital being built or a new bridge being built or whatever, you have to redo everything again. And it costs a lot of money, and investors are not, have to again be convinced of the structure. And then, I think we need to partner with the public sector and the private sector. After those 5 years of partnering successfully, needs to partner to build this infrastructure across the world. There's 30 trillion of infrastructure that should be green to really decarbonize the economy. So there's a lot of work. So fast infra is a good initiative.
I mean, it is certainly true that we need a revolution in the financing of infrastructure. We need a revolution in the growth and development of sustainable infrastructure. Emerging markets are developing in a relatively unsustainable way now, where we have Lagos, a city of 20 million people that has 1 railway line, and it kind of needs 60 subway lines, and Jakarta for that matter, that has 3, and it's the 2nd largest city in the world. We've got work we've really got to do in this area. I mean, it's sort of worth noting as we talk about revolution infrastructure. This is Bastille Day for everyone in France. It's a commemoration of the French Revolution.
Yeah, right. It's a revolution. But look, we'll have metro at the end of this year. So it's happening, in some countries. I mean, it's a G20 country, so maybe it's easier for them, but people are doing it. People are building infrastructure. So it's a better life for the citizens. It's greener. Yeah. So I'm a very optimist. I think we are really going the right way. The problem we have is the amount. It's not just like 1 metro. It should be 15, 20 metro, to make it a real change in the world.
I think that's right. And that's not going to happen realistically with sovereign funding. We're going to have to look at PPP structures to do this. And my favorite all-time superstar PPP structure and my favorite green bond issue of the transport sector is MTR in Hong Kong. Right, and you placed 2 bonds just last month with them, of course. Yeah, because for the listeners, MTR is unusual. It's a 75% government-owned subway company, 25% listed on the stock exchange, and it finances the development of new subway lines through property development on the top of stations. So it does a new subway station, it creates a shopping centre and tower blocks, and the capital gains and the rental income it gets covers the cost of subway. Jean-Marc, we can do this in Jakarta and Lagos and Sao Paulo. You have to take your client global.
It's a good concept, and yeah, I mean, we should really build on best practices here and there, whether they are in Hong Kong and take it to Latam or the other way. I mean, We have seen some very good examples of transport, like, we discussed Mexico City Airport, what they were doing in terms of conservation has been really exemplary. So others, and that can be, in Germany and others, I mean, we can really learn from best practices. So I'm an optimist. I think we talk about crowding in. I mean, public and private can really work together and advance. I'm positive.
Now let's talk about China. Sorry, go ahead.
The one thing, it's again is one is fine, two is fine, but we need 15. Right? And you talk about the PPP. Yes, I mean, the public sector needs to really leverage the private sector, and the other way, we really need to work together. And that's why we're so happy with this fast infra initiative, because it's really public and private sector working together to create a new green infrastructure sector, a new asset class. And we need to build so much in the world, at a low carbon level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry,
right.
I cut you asking a question.
No, I was going to take us to China for a minute. So, now the largest green bond market, Bond Connect has been an important access for overseas investors into China, which is a kind of air bridge, if you like, between Hong Kong and Shanghai and Shenzhen for investors, with some regulatory hurdles removed. Hong Kong Stock Exchange is just setting up a green finance listings and exchange. In fact, Client Bonds is one of their partners. Asia, at least the Hong Kong market, has been catching up over the last few years, with the Hong Kong government issuing a sovereign bond with a 10 billion commitment and so on. But what I'm curious about is how much you see the potential for international engagement in the Chinese domestic green bond market. Obviously, things like Hong Kong Exchange, Green Exchange will help. But do you see that appetite growing? I mean, yields are still there. We don't have yields in Japan or Europe. They're virtually non-existent. Right. Are we going to see investors shopping more in China, especially now that PBOC is bringing out new criteria which exclude fossil fuels in China, so they're in line with the European criteria? Is this going to grow? I mean, I'm hoping it is, but I don't know.
Look, we have been a huge supporter of the internationalization of the RMB market. And obviously, the inclusion of the RMB into the SDR basket means that it's now very clearly an international currency. So we've seen more and more investors, go and invest in RMB. Some of them offshore, a lot of them onshore. So that's a growing proposition. And indeed, green will help. So we're working on this. We are, opening accounts. We are participating in those transactions. It's a policy objective, of the country. So we're confident they just do it in their rhythm. Every year we progress. So it's exciting developments, and we are contributing to it. So yeah, we'd love to do faster, quicker, bigger, but it's happening. It's good.
Fair enough. Paresh Patel has an interesting question. He's said that there is a pending project concept he's working on, which is bringing a consortium of corporations. I mean, for example, some oil and gas companies financing climate mitigation and resilience infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Is there anything stopping them, I guess, pooling that into green bond issuance? And there's a structuring question, clearly, but from a green bond market, I would say sounds simple, no? Jean-Marc, what do you think? So, pool of companies, oil and gas companies financing green.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure the exact question, but if you, if many of the oil project would be joint ventures, right? So you would have 2 or 3 or 4 companies doing exploration or distribution together, right? So if that is then used to green the sector, absolutely, it's a welcome development and interesting one. So yeah, why not? Yeah, call us.
So I think, Paresh, it means if the investments qualify...
I'm on LinkedIn, you can call me.
There you go. There's the invitation, Paresh. If the investments qualify, it'll qualify. It comes down to that. That's Any right. Structuring can work.
And we can get a certification from the CBI, and here we go.
If they're the right investments, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
That's right. That's right.
What about what about the CMBS market? You know, there's a discussion that we might see a lot of need for refinancing in the future going forward. We've seen the Fannie Mae story, of course, which is ABS issued against their loans. But in Europe, we haven't seen a lot of this going forward at other markets.
Yes, it's a good point, and I think the Capital Markets Union is really looking at securitization as a growth area and as somewhere that we need to nurture. I don't understand why Europe has not been larger in CMBS, RMBS, ABS generally, for whether it's for credit card, for auto loans, for residential. It's a mystery for me. Is it the case that we have to do some work towards a bit more union, right, based, instead of having a German ABS or a French ABS or a Czech ABS, something a bit more like European? Maybe that's the case. We need to work there, possibly. But yeah, it's a huge market. It's a super tool to get finance. It's less risk for investors. It's the risk appetite you want. So some of the guys would love like the B tranche and take risk and be paid for it. It has always been a mystery why Europe is smaller. But I guess I'll get incoming from my colleagues who may be listening and say, "Hey, Jean-Marc, you don't understand. We need your help. We need your help with Brussels or something."
Well, they probably are, but it is also the thing where, I would argue, where habits die hard. And then in Europe, we've tended to have a close relationship with banks, and it's been a bank-led sector, a bit like India in a way, actually. We've never really developed alternative ways of fundraising in the same way as happened in the States. So while it's ECB,
that has been my career. I would challenge that. That has been my career. I've seen it, when banks were financing 90% of the economy, and now, and 10% was the bond market. That was true for Asia, that was true for us in Europe. And I think we're now more into 70-30. For sure, you're right. The US is the other one. It's 30-70 or even 20-80, right? So we still have a lot of work to do, but we are on the road. We're actually on the right way, where issuers will benefit from longer maturities, fixed rates, no covenant wall, less dependency on their core banks. So it's good to have the flexibility of what would I call a mini perm, right? It's basically the RCF. But that's good. It is a building block you need in your toolbox of a corporate, but that doesn't go beyond 5. And by the way, if you do 5, it's probably amortizing anyway, right? So it's good to have the flexibility to call it and extend all that. It's perfect, right? But to actually do longer dated, whether it's high yield or investment grade, you can raise, basically project bond money, right? 15, 30 year, 20 year, you can't do that with a bank. You can't anymore, right? With the regulatory world that we are in, the banks cannot fund, whether they are green or not, projects, they can't. So I think we continue. We are on the road. We have progressed. I've seen the last 20 years, huge progress from where we were. But it's true. But look, it's interesting to have the new commission super motivated on the CMU. Right. So clearly, Capital Markets Union, people understand that in very high places that we need to work on this so that we can fund everyone in Europe, any project like they do in the US, which is great news. You don't need to go to the dollar market. That's exciting. And for how much we have to do on the green side, we need a large capital markets, in Europe to actually fund the green transition.
We need to wrap up in the next 5 minutes, Jean-Marc. So I'm just going to just a few little questions wrap up. I'll deal with a couple myself. Richard Key, has there been bonds by conservation-focused NGOs? Not really, except if you count some stuff that TNC has done. Again, because of what Jean-Marc was saying, we need scale. NGOs are not really in a position to be able to issue bonds unless they've got assets. But we have seen some blue bonds. Notably, the Seychelles did a bond which was essentially a debt forgiveness or a placement of high yield of lower yield in return for achieving some environmental goals, notably the expansion of marine parks. You're going to see a lot more talk about blue. Remember, it's a subset of green. If you treat it as separate and it becomes illiquid, you're going to pay an illiquidity premium. it's going to be 15 basis points more expensive. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
You want to make it part of the green bond market, right? Jean-Marc, is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the blue bonds are absolutely a part of green. I mean, it's environment, it's conservation, it's biodiversity. It's part of green. And actually, blue bonds have been very successful. Every time they come to the market, there's huge appetite. There's not enough of those. And I think we'll see more. It shouldn't be just, the tiny countries that are, islands and with all the threats to their life. It could be, coasts in Asia, in Europe, in the US. There is a lot of things to do as well to protect the coastal areas and those economies and those lives. Look, I mean, it's one thing we have not discussed is sustainability-linked bonds, right? And the NL transaction, talking again of defining trades. When they came with several billions of transactions, they really changed the game. And some clients, they can do use of proceeds, and others, they cannot really do use of proceeds. They do those kind of policy targets for sovereigns or targets for corporates. So I think we have this expansion of the market thanks to those initiatives, those innovations. And it was good to see again at the ICMA AGM, the SBP AGM, those principles published so that sustainability-linked bonds have a framework and have some guidelines so that investors, issuers can grow this market. And people like NL can do successful transaction and raise finance for their projects. So it's exciting.
It's an interesting development of the market. For our listeners, this is being recorded. It will be available on YouTube, on our Climate Bonds Initiative channel, or on podcasts, Spotify, Apple, and Google. If you search climatebonds.net/webinars, you will get all the information about how to get hold of it, and you'll be able to tell your friends about this webinar should you think it's of interest. A couple of last things. Basics. If you do a green bond, you've got to get independent verification. You can get a second opinion provider, as it's called, which are independent specialists, or you can get a verification by an approved climate bonds verifier, which is a certification model, or you can get a green review by the likes of S&P that have Standard & Poor's have a green review. So there are some options available. And this is now becoming, I think, pretty ubiquitous in the market. Most bonds have if not all bonds, have an independent review of some kind, I think, Jean-Marc. That was one question. The next question, are we seeing any crypto or block?
Was it a comment or a question? Because we
I kind of answered
CBI. I mean, the CBI is a good one, and I mean, you have been certified. I mean, how many bonds did you give certification to?
We're about
like
130
hundreds.
billion US so far. So
exactly. So it's huge. So you have been absolutely at the heart of this market with certification, right? So. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Thank you. Got you down on the quote down. Are you seeing crypto and blockchain and all these things? Has this got any place in this market? Is this relevant, or is this just part of plumbing of the banking sector? IT.
It's a very good question. Yeah. It's a very good question, and for me, crypto or call it DLT blockchain, it's totally infancy. It's 3, 4, 5 years old. So we just don't know yet. We have been focusing on crypto money, but I think the DLT blockchain technology is useful at other things. And it's very early days. I think we don't know yet. I'm sure there is room for usage of DLT blockchain into what we do in green bonds so that the truth is widely shared effectively. So yeah, that's early days, but it's a very good question.
And to finish up, for your clients at HSBC, you've got a huge global remit. What do you see as the biggest challenge they're facing in addressing this climate change, their green finance agenda? How would you characterize that? And of course, what do you see them doing?
The scalability. I mean, can we finance as a collective of investors, the banks? Can we finance how much our clients have to finance, whether they are sovereigns, as you hinted earlier, or whether they are corporates, and even some banks, but certainly those MDBs, sovereigns, and corporates. There is so much to invest in. There is so much capital needed to transition from where we are to where we want to be, and we should not wait for 30 years. That's really the next 10, 15. There's a lot of needs. So yeah, let's get on with it and get to work.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to have you on this show, this new webinar show that we're doing.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
For all our listeners, you can contact HSBC and Jean-Marc via channels. If you can catch him, he's an elusive chap because he's always working on so many deals. But if you have an opportunity and you want to connect, we'll find a way to connect you. Let me know. You can find out more details at climatebonds.net/webinars. You should, if you've registered for this event, you should have the details for how to find us and recordings. There will be more of these. We have other webinars coming in every single week. We're doing 3 webinars. There'll be another Green Bonds Clinic in about a month's time. And we'll be doing more with Jean-Marc over the coming 6 months. We're cooking up ideas to work together. In the meantime, good luck in your own endeavors for changing this planet to become a sustainable planet, to become a world that we actually want our children to live in, rather than the world that we're heading towards now. And Jean-Marc, thank you for your work in pioneering and growing this market. Good luck, and let's talk about this topic again in the future at the next huge growth stage, which I expect to see over the coming 12 months.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, one of the climate heroes. So thank you, Sean Kidney.
Thank you, Jean-Marc.
Speak to you soon.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.